My guest tonight is the co-chairman of the PM's Indigenous Advisory Council. He's also the founder of the Stronger Smarter Institute, which is dedicated to improving educational outcomes for Indigenous kids. He joins us from Brisbane. Would you please welcome Professor Chris Sarra? Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate it. I hope we're not taking you away from anything important.
Great to be with you. Loving your show. I've got my kids at home, so it's all good.
What do you mean it's all good with the kids?
No, I'm just kind of hoping that nobody comes and steals them while I'm away.
God damn it, Chris Sarra!
I'm joking.
All right, it's a comedy show. So today we're on this anniversary, right? 10 years since Kevin Rudd gave that apology to Parliament. Where were you 10 years ago, and what does that apology mean to you personally? Well,
I remember very well where I was, Tom. I was actually sitting in the House of Reps up in the gallery on what was a monumental occasion. And I remember thinking at the time, this is big. And I did some media afterwards, and I didn't realise at the time just how prolific the crowds of people were in other parts of the country and outside Parliament House. It was massive, but you didn't get a sense of that inside the chamber.
It was certainly
massive.
Where I was. It was a massive deal at the time, right? And you might have heard Craig Quartermain's piece that we just put to air there as well. It was a massive deal at the time. He was sceptical about it. It did happen. It felt like a real moment of healing for the nation. But there is this point that since then, we haven't necessarily seen the outcomes we'd like to. More Indigenous kids are being removed now than at the height of the stolen generation. Some Indigenous kids are being removed at 10 times the amount of non-Indigenous kids. How can we think about it? Can we really be congratulating ourselves about that apology when that's the reality now?
Yeah, look, I think people have to understand it and in its fullest context, you know, and we get stuck into these kind of binaries about symbolism versus practical reconciliation and those sorts of things. What was the Prime Minister? John Howard used to talk about stuff like that. But it was monumental in a sense that it changed something about the psyche of Aboriginal people and the relationship that existed with government and with other Australians. And so any kind of psychologist will tell you that when people express emotions, as you know, the emotion of hurt and anger at not being acknowledged, and all of that was building up and building up and building up. And in a perverse kind of way, Howard made it build up even more. So it became exacerbated, almost to the point where it could get really toxic. But then thankfully Kevin Rudd came along and he offered that apology, which basically said, we acknowledge that emotion, we acknowledge that you're hurting, we acknowledge that you're angry, and we are sorry. And it was like a pinprick in a balloon that kind of set off a whole chain of relief for a whole lot of people. And of course, it was just one symbolic moment. And of course, we have to get on with the kind of practical applications of what saying sorry means,
right.
And attend to all those other things. But we shouldn't underestimate the significance of that and what it did for our relationship.
Those other things you mentioned are sort of outlined in the Closing the Gap report. These are targets that we've set as a country to say to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. We want to hit these 7 targets. We got the report for 2018 yesterday. Just 3 out of those targets are on track, halving the gap in Year 12 attainment, child mortality, early childhood education. But those other targets, including like life expectancy gap between white and black Australia, aren't on track. Why is that happening, and why should we have any hope that it's going to get better?
Well, I think, look, I've been in particular gatherings over the last week, and it's been a heavy couple of days, as is this period. You know, we come straight out of talking about wanting to change Australia Day into this kind of closing the gap conversation. And it's always a heavy conversation, and it's a time when we feel frustrated. And I think when we look back on the last 10 years, there are some real lessons to learn from that, you know, that there was a time when the closing the gap agenda kind of lost its way. We had that great moment of the apology, and then beyond that, we saw the politics in Australia go really strange, you know. It's like...
Hang on, what were you going to say there? That sounded like you were going to say something else entirely.
No, I know you swear a lot on this show, but I have to be measured, you know. But it's like the Prime Ministership became a plaything for people, and we had these kind of personalities snatching at it, and then a girl came along and took it, and that sent a lot of people crazy. And so there was this tremendous distraction from the proper process of government. And somewhere in there, when it comes to Indigenous affairs, we had a Prime Minister who wanted to be the Prime Minister for Indigenous affairs. And he had a kind of blocked hole, if you like. Was listening to very narrow perspectives on a way forward here, and that wasn't helpful.
Okay. Look, Chris, I'm really sorry, but I'm being told we're out of time, unfortunately. We're going to keep chatting to Chris for our podcast. We have a Tightly podcast. We'll continue this conversation here. Unfortunately, I need to wrap you up, which is perhaps a symbol for the broader conversation of race relations in this country. But thank you so much for your time and for joining us. Chris Sarra, everybody. Please give it up.